Welcome to the Unique Boutique. I'm your host, Matt Hodkinson. My guest today is a best-selling author, a globally recognised authority on innovation, leadership and culture, and, by his own admission, a man who burnt out and sold his business just 5 days before Lehman Brothers brought the financial world to its knees. We talk about what it really takes for a consultancy to stand out, why evidence beats opinion every time, and the platform he's built, the Evaluate Hub, that's putting enterprise-grade diagnostic tools in the hands of boutique firms. He's also got a strong view on why telling your clients something they don't want to hear might be your single biggest competitive advantage. This is my interview with Cris Beswick. Cris Beswick, welcome to the Unique Boutique. How are you today, sir?
I am very good, Matt. Thank you very much.
Great to have you on today. Listen, I want to kick things off. We connected on LinkedIn, as I do with many of my guests, and I have to start with a line from your profile that I loved. You talk about bringing operational scars and pattern recognition rather than consulting playbooks. Now, for a consultancy founder, how much of that need to genuinely stand out comes down to being honest, that you've actually done the thing, not just advised on it?
Yeah, I mean, look, from in my experience, with the people that I advise, so the clients that I work with, it has proved to be disproportionately valuable. That doesn't mean, though, that every consultant out there has to, have led a business or built a team or been an entrepreneur. There are some amazing consultants out there that haven't done that, but are absolutely brilliant. But in the world that I operate in, it's just proved to be really, I would say, invaluable from a peer recognition point of view.
Fantastic. Listen, I dove straight in there with the first question. We haven't really
That's all right.
no. Listen, tell us in your own words. Obviously, we heard about you in my intro, but tell us
Yeah,
about your background in consulting, what you've been working on in more recent times, which we're going to dive
yeah.
deeper into as well.
Okay. Yeah. So, gosh, I have been in the consulting advisory space since the early 2000.
Okay.
I built my first consultancy in the late 90s, exited that, and then built my second one in the early 2000s, exited again in 2008. Fun fact for any pub quiz out there, 5 days before Lehman Brothers crashed. So incredibly lucky. People say timing is everything. I'd love to be able to say, I had the word on the street and I had insider info and all that, but the reality was it was just so incredibly lucky in terms of the timing. I signed with the lawyers on September the 9th, 2008, and Lehman Brothers crashed 5 days later. So just super lucky, really. The deal just wouldn't have gone ahead post the crash. So very lucky. And then I took some time out. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at the time. I took some time out and I just started to consolidate all of the things that I'd learned as an entrepreneur, a founder, a CEO. How did I build the team that we had? How did we drive growth? A lot really about the team, about culture, about bonding those people together, really making sort of all of the things that I talk about now, like making turning up to work, like, genuinely something the team wanted to do. And I consolidated that into my first book. And that really was about strategy and leadership and culture and, you know, organizations and cultures promoting risk and creativity, all of the things that we'd built.
Hmm.
And the intention, I didn't really have an intention. I just sort of wrote that. I was in a period of just taking loads of time off. Just sort of an addendum to that, actually, just a precursor, sorry, is the right word to that. And again, a lot of your founders, a lot of the listeners will either have experienced this or will have experience of it. I sold that company in 2008. I actually left in 2007. I completely burnt out.
Yeah.
So one of the other bits of context that really helps me now is I work with CEOs and executive teams around the world, of predominantly huge, very complex. A lot of the brands that everyone listening will know. I won't sort of reel them off, but you know, if I did, you would know all of the brands. When you work with senior execs and leaders and CEOs at that level, the conversation about burnout is much more common than you would ever expect. And I'm sure a lot of your audience and the people that you collaborate with and that listen to the show, as a founder and a CEO and an entrepreneur, it's such a widespread issue that isn't talked about.
Yeah.
So that was the reason for me selling. I didn't know what I was going to do at the time. Anyway, back to the story. So I wrote my book, and it was a consolidation of all of the things that I knew were great about building creative, innovation-led cultures and how you lead for those and all of that. And just purely by chance, that resonated, and I just started to get asked to go back into boardrooms of clients who said, "Hey, Cris, you and your team used to come in and solve problems for us, and we paid you for that. Could you actually?" And this was sort of like 2011, maybe ish, and the word innovation had started to really hit the boardroom, and it was starting to dominate conversations as a post Lehman Brothers reaction. And I started to get asked to go back in and explain to them what that meant from a corporate capability perspective. What did that mean from a leadership perspective? How do we as leaders really drive innovation in our organizations? How do we build the right culture in our organizations so that we can drive that? And my career has just gone progressively upwards from there.
Fantastic. Cris, I
Second,
want to ask about those early experiences with the
yeah.
consultancies that you founded and grew. What sort of flavor of consulting were you in at that point in time? I mean, you mentioned some of the big household name clients. What was it that you were doing for them?
Yeah, so the bigger clients were more. I mean, look, we had big clients. Our clients were people like M&S, B&Q, Nokia. The clients, what I was referring to was sort of the list of clients that I work with now, but similar sort of global names. The main consultancy that I sold in 2008 was a retail strategy company. So we did a lot of retail strategy. We did a huge amount of consumer research, and then we built retail strategies around that. Around like redesigning approaches to whole categories. Things like redesigning and helping M&S like relaunch their bakery and their cafe, loads of stuff like that. Launching, helping launch like Nokia concept stores back in the day. Just really good like retail environments, consumer behavior, all that kind of stuff. And I suppose being in that space taught me about the human side of business, because when you're in that sector from a design and a strategy point of view, you fundamentally have to understand consumer behavior and human behavior more than most sectors. And that transfers internally to how you then understand your people and your team, and then the culture that you create inside. And all of the work that I do now is based around those fundamentals: strategy, leadership, and culture. I call it strategy, leadership, and culture for innovation-led growth. And it's all built on those core things that we did back in the day.
Amazing. And before we sort of move on from that burnout discussion as well, Cris, I'd like to dive into that a little bit, because you're right, it is skipped over. But interestingly, on the predecessor of this particular podcast, we had some guests who were quick to point out that they'd experienced it themselves in the consulting space. I think when it is a people-led business, when there are pressures from all directions, all stakeholders on client side, from our teams, from leadership, if that's your place in the organization, I guess it's sort of inevitable, as unwanted and as wasteful as it really does seem. Do you think the things that you now focus on, things like leadership, innovation, culture, How do they impact on that burnout? How can they improve the situation for people and perhaps reduce the propensity for that to occur?
Well, I think, look, we are getting better at, I sort of, I'm sure I can't do this every single time, but quite often I can spot it now.
Mm.
I can sit down in a boardroom and I when you I call it I jokingly still refer to it as the sausage machine, and I don't know where that analogy came from, right? But that's what it felt coming out of that period. It felt like I'd been through a sausage machine. Um, but unlike many, I'd actually come out of it fairly unscathed. I'm still here for one, and a lot of, and it's not a male or female thing, but the majority of, and I don't know whether this statistic is still true, but the biggest cause of death in men under 50 is still suicide.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, any viewer knowing that stat better than me, don't crucify me for getting that wrong, but it is still a hugely significant contributor to, to the death of men under 50 or under 40, whatever the stat is.
For sure.
I think we're getting better at diagnosing it in organizations, or not diagnosing, but spotting it and supporting people, because it's now recognized, mental health and well-being, that conversation wasn't around in my day. It just wasn't a conversation. And it certainly wasn't one in a male dominated environment. And rightly or wrongly at the time, in predominantly male dominated boardrooms, all the senior execs were, like you and I, middle-aged, grey-haired men, and vulnerability and soft things, as they're somehow sometimes referred to, that just wasn't the done thing. You didn't talk about stuff like that in the boardroom, but we do now, and we're open to talking about that. And the work that I do and a lot of other thinkers in the leadership space have made, vulnerability a superpower from a leadership perspective, not something to hide. So we've shifted the focus on, it's not something to hide. Actually, from a leadership point of view, it can actually be a brilliant advantage. So I think we've shifted the conversation, and more people like me and you and others talk about it, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, thank goodness we are in a much, much better place, and we've been given permission really to
Yeah.
talk about that, and
Well, it's a safe environment to talk about it, and for others to go, oh, well, there's no way he can be a leader now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's that, it's the open. Look, one of the things that I do a lot of work in organizations is building the right level of psychological safety so that innovation can occur, right? So that people can voice opinion, they can challenge the organization, they can take some risk. And vulnerability is a core component of that. So the things that we're teaching leaders now around what contemporary leadership takes are a million miles away from the traditional management and leadership development of old, which never included things like, empathy and radical candor and psychological safety and vulnerability and human centricity. But it does now. And that has opened the doorway for different conversations about subjects like that.
Yeah. I'm glad we sort of dove into that. I think it's so important to discuss. I do want to tap into the innovation side of things.
Yeah.
You talked about being there when innovation started getting the focus it deserves around the boardroom.
Yeah.
And I noticed we're talking before we started recording, of course, about the vast, seemingly, amount of speaking and public speaking that you do. And you've got this great stat. I think you've posted it even today as we record this on your LinkedIn profile, that 84% of leaders say that innovation is critical, but only 6% are happy with how they're doing it. And I
with
can't
their
help
current
feeling,
performance. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I can't help feeling there are parallels in the work that I do when it comes to consultancies saying that they're differentiated, and actually when you dive into it, the vast majority of them really don't feel that way.
Yeah.
So how first off, I guess, how innovative do you feel that organizations are today, and what do they need to be focusing on? And when it comes to differentiating, standing out in the sector, how can that really help them as well?
So I think that statistic, if I'm not mistaken, is from a McKinsey survey. It's a couple of years old now, but I don't think those numbers have like radically changed in any way. You know, that ratio hasn't shifted. Um, one of the challenges, so let's put innovation into context first. One of the issues with the whole conversation around innovation is the word is misunderstood and it's been bastardized over the last 10 years, and it's been devalued because everyone and anyone has just thrown the word around. We've now got an innovation team and we've got an innovation department and we have innovative ideas. Well, you can't have an innovative idea unless the idea is deemed to be innovative, right? But we now tag the word on everything. The work that I do forces organizations to reframe what innovation is in their context. But for me, the core context of innovation is not a thing that you do, it's an outcome. What I mean by that is the whole because most organizations have forgot why they want to pursue innovation in the first place. So innovation has now just become performative. It's become something that they have to say they do and look like they're doing, but actually they're not really doing a huge amount of. The whole reason that we embrace innovation and we pursue it is because, to use your language, we want as an organization to completely differentiate ourselves from the competition. So we want to drive competitive advantage. We want to do things differently, and we want to provide different, whether it's products, services, experiences, whatever, to customers, so that we differentiate in the market. And organizations have, in many ways, forgotten that's the fundamental reason why we pursue innovation. When you pursue it in that way, there has to be a return on investment. Now, if you switch that focus from innovation isn't a thing that we do, it's an outcome that we're aiming for. The other phrase that I use is innovation is a badge that can only be bestowed on you by your customers. So now, if you talk about that in the context of an organization, now we cannot say we're innovative. We cannot label our new product innovative. We cannot say we have just launched the most innovative experience that we've ever launched. Only the customer can designate what you do innovative. And that means it has to have impact. It's got to be demonstrably and measurably different. The customer's got to go, holy cow, this is just the best thing since sliced bread. And at that point, and here's the irony about innovation, if the customer never ever calls your thing innovative, it doesn't matter, because if it shifted the needle and the average basket price has gone up, or you've completely dominated the market, or you've moved into a new geography, whatever it is, if the impact of what you were trying to do through innovation has been achieved, it doesn't matter if no one labels it innovative. But we've lost sight of that in organizations, and most of my work is about helping organizations figure that out and get back to what are we trying to do, where do we want to go as an organization, how does it innovation and being more innovative contribute to that 5-10 year plan, whatever it is. And then the core thing that I do then is, how do we now have to lead for that differently? Because most leadership teams have never been taught how to lead for the kind of environment innovation requires and the kind of culture that innovation requires.
So I want to dive into the impact piece there,
Yeah.
because completely agree with all of that. I mean, the impact is going to be felt by the customer, and that's what's going to make them ultimately determine whether you're innovative or not.
Yeah.
I just wonder how many times you see this, Cris, that those organizations aren't focused on impact as much as they really need to be. We see this in the
Yeah.
consultancy space, of course, and you'll perhaps have experienced this, where there's too much emphasis on positioning around capabilities and service lines, that
Hmm.
it's what we do as a discipline, it's our skill set, rather than the ultimate impact that we're providing to the clients. So do you see that across organizations as well, that they're not providing as much of a focused lens on impact as they really should be?
Yes. And there's a couple of things on that point. I think, we're seeing sort of the rapid erosion of the big consultancies and their model starting to sort of fall apart. And predominantly that is because of the point you've just made. It's about what capabilities do these guys have, do these big consultancies have? We need those capabilities as an organization. Therefore, we will buy them because they're a safe pair of hands.
Yeah.
Versus what are the outcomes that we want from that intervention and that relationship? And a lot of the clients that I work with have used all of the big consultancies for decades. And they're now saying, but we need more tangible outcomes. We need to see clearly that there's a route between our current state, where we are now, and our future desired state, which is a shift here or a shift in capability or a shift in market share, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We need to see and be absolutely confident that whoever we bring in to help us on that journey can deliver that outcome, not can just deliver great thinking and a playbook that will hopefully get us there,
Yeah.
but actually help us genuinely get into that. And I think we are, but the same plays out in organizations. The challenge with a lot of organizations, the big sort of global ones, is they're constantly in transformation mode.
Yeah.
So they, they're almost fatigued in terms of transformation, and there's no consolidation. No one comes in and says, right, let's just stop and take stock. So we're in the middle of a transformation program, but actually we now need to layer this in, and then 6 months later we need to layer this other thing in, and suddenly you're quite simple. And I say that, I don't mean to undermine how complex transformation is, but to make the point, your seemingly simple transformation program has now become incredibly complex because we've layered loads and loads of things in. The jump on the bandwagon to AI versus saying, where do we need to go over the next 5 years? And what level of AI do we need to help us get there?
Yeah.
Versus, oh my God, we've got to integrate AI across everything and it's the panacea and it's going to save the day. And right. Because when you do that, you start to transform the organization in a way that it doesn't need to be transformed yet. It doesn't mean that in 5 years' time you might need to go into that space or to that level, but it's about organizations have got to learn they have to go on a journey. And this is probably the best analogy. Organizations have got to go on a journey. What they're trying to do is skip the journey and go straight to the destination as fast as they can. The challenge with that is the learning and the development of people and culture and systems as you go on the journey is palatable and doable for the people in an organization. When you try and skip past that at 100 miles an hour because you're scared that you've got to get there first or at the same pace as everyone else, that's when transformation fails. And in my experience, most organizations that try and transform at the pace they think everyone else is transforming at, they're the ones that lose, because the reality is no one's transforming at any given pace at all.
Yeah.
Look at the stats around AI implementation. It's like 80% failure rate of implementation of AI programs over the past few years. Yeah, everyone's still going, we've got to transform, we've got to transform. The data's telling us that no one's doing it successfully at the moment. So yeah, it's a challenge.
You, I mean, you picked up on it. People are buying certainty. They're buying that high confidence that things are going to get done. So again, just to reiterate, it baffles me that people are willingly going headlong into transformations around something like AI, which demonstrably has evidence that it doesn't work. And I just feel like that impact-led approach is going to work to a far greater degree than just, as you said, you beautifully put it, the panacea that people are buying into. And we're seeing that AI proposition just get bolted onto every consultancy's kind of tagline and headline, because they feel they've got to be seen to be that leader in the space. They've got to be seen to be on top of it. Whereas if everybody claims it no longer becomes an edge. A rising tide lifts all boats, and all those boats are riding high right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, there's no doubt everyone will have to embrace AI. It's the next, it's an evolutionary, it's the evolution of the human species and the technology that we create, right? So it is the next phase of our evolution as human beings that are technology led, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a fad that's just, here today and gone tomorrow. It will be a fundamental part of what shapes our future. But organizations need to embrace that at the right pace and embrace AI in a way that's commensurate with what they can adapt and what they can assimilate at any one time, that's palatable and reasonable for the organization, rather than saying we've got to implement this when it's really maybe 5 years away for them. We've got to do it now because everyone else is, and this whole thing's become a race.
And we'll figure out the purpose and the impact later.
Yeah, and but the reality is they spend a huge amount of money. A huge amount of that is wasted. And actually, they go to implement 100% of whatever it is, and inevitably only end up implementing 10, but it's cost them the equivalent of 100%. And all that's doing is fatiguing organizations. There's no one's really clear in, what's AI going to do? How's it going to enable me to do my job better? What's the governance around AI? Am I now mandated? Is it mandatory that I use AI now to do my job? There's all of these questions coming up in the corporate world, and it's just creating confusion. And when you've got confusion, organizations don't move forward because everyone's just running around in circles trying to figure out what's going on today, and they're not shaping the future.
Well, listen, AI has its benefits in a huge way in specific use cases, and I do want to talk about the project actually that you've been working on that is beneath the reason we connected in the first place, the Evaluate Hub, and if I could write that up on the screen, you'd see that it's got AI in the middle of it. But the hub itself is fascinating. I think you've taken your own diagnostic IP and turned it into something that other consultancies then build on. And just tell us about that moment that you decided to productize that rather than keep it as your own secret weapon.
Yeah. So if I go back a little bit, so several years ago, I worked with one of the big tech firms to help them measure what we call innovation maturity. And innovation maturity is the combination of an organization's innovation capability and how embedded that capability is across the organization. So, into the culture of the organization. And we package that up and we call it innovation maturity. And in the advisory work that I do, I built my own diagnostic. So one of the things I would do before starting an engagement with a board or a senior team is, and typically they'd say, look, Cris, innovation is now like the McKinsey sort of stat, innovation now is a strategic priority for us. We know we need to drive differentiation. We've got to drive transformation. We know innovation's a core strategic priority. What do we do? Where do we start? How do we do it? That would be a typical call that I would get, say, Cris, come and help us. Or like a lot of organizations, Cris, we've been throwing money at innovation, in inverted commas, for several years now. We've got no ROI. It's not embedded in our culture. We've created virtually nothing from it. But, a CEO might say to me, Cris, I've got 4 innovation labs around the world. I've got a chief innovation officer. We've got 40 people in the innovation team. It's costing me $10 million a year. We've been doing that for 5 years and I've got 0 ROI. So I'd then be brought in to see if I could, figure out why and then help fix it. And one of the things that I built to do that was a diagnostic called AIM, so AIM. So it's just short for the Assessment for Innovation Maturity. And I invested in that tool. I had that built as a piece of software. So it's a think organization or employee engagement survey, that kind of thing. So it's something that goes out into an organization. All the employees take it. I mean, you don't actually need every single employee. You need a good enough cross section to give you the statistical accuracy that you need. And that would give me a complete diagnosis of what was happening, where, why, were the issues around leadership? Were they around management? Was it around day-to-day behavior? Was it around investment? Was it around lack of tools and processes or governance? A whole host of things. That then enabled me to go into an organization and be surgical rather than take a sledgehammer approach. So big consultancy approach. Oh, we've got to turn everything on its head. You need a complete transformation. We've got to redesign everything. What AIM allowed us to do was to go in and say, right, you will need to transform almost everything that you do. But right now, today, at the level of maturity that we've measured you at, these 5 things are what are holding you back today. So let's fix those. And then in 6 or 12 months, when we've made good headway on fixing those things, we'll run AIM again and we'll see whether we've made progress. And if we have, those issues won't flag up because you might have moved up the maturity curve a little bit. But when you do, other things will flag up as issues and then we'll tackle them. So our job as consultants and advisors is to take organizations on a journey from, you're here today and you want to get to this capability or transform to there's a desired future state. And our job is to take them on a journey.
Yeah.
What you don't do to take organizations on a journey is you don't say, you need to fix all 50 things and we need to start today, right? You say, let's fix these 5. And then in 12 months' time, then we'll move on and we'll fix the next ones. Because as an organization matures, the things that you need to fix become more complex because they're more mature, right? And they require different solutions. So I built AIM to do that. And AIM measures that. It measures a whole host of questions against the maturity curve, which, and the key thing about AIM is it was weighted questions linked specifically to different stages of maturity. So that's what flags different questions up at different stages of maturity. And for the past several years, I've had loads of different, I've got a brilliant network of other fellow consultants and thought leaders and speakers around the world. And I've always had them say, Cris, could we put our assessment on your platform? We run, we're a culture change organization and, we've got a cultural diagnostic, or, I'm a leadership coach and I have this leadership confidence assessment that I use when I'm coaching leaders. The system that I had built had been hard coded, so you couldn't change anything. And about 12 months ago, I wanted to reinvest in the tool and rebuild it, have it built in modern coding language. Don't ask me the technical stuff because it's just way over my head, but modern language. And my developer said, Cris, we don't even write in what it was written in, several 8 years ago. So let's recode it. And I wanted to start looking at how we would integrate AI into the tool. So I took the decision to say, okay, what if I build it so that I can now answer those questions from friends and other consultants that say, can I put my assessment on your platform? So I haven't had AIM rebuilt. I've had a platform built and invested a fairly significant chunk of money in having it built so that any consultant, any strategic advisor, any coach that runs assessments in clients, whether that's you're assessing a leadership team on leadership alignment, you could be a PE firm who wants to run an assessment with companies that they're about to invest in terms of measuring how closely aligned those companies are for when they do a post-investment integration into the main company. you can put any assessment on. If your assessment is typically what I would call a linear assessment, so a set of questions and there's a score, typically on a Likert scale. What the Evaluate Hub will do is it will turn your standard flat linear assessment into a weighted maturity model.
Nice.
And it will help you do that. So you can now say, right, rather than just running this flat assessment where we just give people a score, we can now create a set of maturity levels so we can take that client on a journey. So let's say leadership confidence, for example. I've got a friend of mine who measures the leadership teams he coaches around their confidence level. What he will do now, he will take his linear assessment, he will put it into Evaluate, and Evaluate will ask him to create maturity levels. So it'll say how many different levels from, no confidence right up to, elite level confidence, or whatever levels you want to create. And it could be 3 levels, 4, 5, whatever. And then when you add the questions in, it will then ask you to link those questions to a certain one of those maturity levels. And then it will automatically calculate the maturity level thresholds and the weighting for each of those questions. So you now have a completely weighted maturity model that helps you take your clients on a journey rather than just give them a score. It transforms how you assess clients.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, and this sounds like something that every consultancy would need, right? I mean, the reality is we're all having to go in and diagnose from the off. I've seen diagnostics like this work pre and post sale, where it's a great qualifier to assess, where is somebody at, and even to the extent that are we the right people to be helping this organization?
Absolutely,
because to my mind, it's negligent to sell something to somebody that doesn't need what we've got to offer. It might be that their needs are elsewhere, and this allows them to diagnose exactly that.
Absolutely.
The other thing I want to bake into that before I get your rebuttal,
the big guys have this though.
They absolutely do, and this, I guess, you're democratizing it, is what I was going to say. But
that's the whole point.
And the other factor is you're helping these consultancies to really back themselves, because in my experience, there are still consultancies out there that kind of hide their results under a bushel. This is making real that initial benchmark and then the results post work that they're generating for their clients, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. So there are other platforms where, as a small independent consultancy or a boutique agency, you most simply don't have the budget to say, let's build our own bespoke assessment maturity model that we can deploy in our clients. But the big guys have this. So it makes it more difficult for boutique consultancies to compete with the big boys. I've taken the hit, but if this takes off, I'll get that back through selling licenses. But the point is, I needed to build this anyway. I've just built it so that I can now, as a SaaS product, we can license it. But it will allow boutique consultancies and smaller, individual consultants, whatever, to really give some real substance, but to their thought leadership. So you can already use standard off the shelf, I don't know, culture diagnostics and leadership benchmarks. You can do all that, but the beauty about a lot of boutique consultancies and thought leaders like myself is we have our own thinking. So I don't want to go to another assessment platform and just license a leadership diagnostic, because I've got my own thinking and approach about how would I diagnose leaders and assess them. And then off the back of that assessment needs to mirror what I would then say, right, I'm going to now work with you to fix A, B, and C. So the Evaluate Hub allows consultancies to put their own assessments on, their own questions, their own answers, their own maturity levels, so that they can go, right, we have 3 maturity levels and you've scored at number 1, and we're now going to build an intervention to get you to number 3 or whatever it is. It's about allowing consultancies to use their own thought leadership and IP and turn that into assessments that become part of the advisory journey that they take clients on.
Cris, I really like your idea of a position of truth, establishing what is an honest baseline, I guess, before any change. If you
Mm.
turn that same lens onto a consultancy's own positioning that they're putting out into market, what would the honest baseline usually reveal about that consultancy?
Well, I think it's a little bit like, we might get on to talk about innovation theatre, what in my world is called innovation theatre a little bit later, but I think organizations have got to do a real, consultancies have got to do a real deep dive into what is genuine differentiation. Like, you know, in terms of the proposition, the people, the thought leadership. And in my experience, having come from the consultancy world and having built consultancies, even we probably thought that we were more different than we were. And I think the challenge is being really, really honest and almost like being super critical of ourselves as consultants to say, are we genuinely different? Is our proposition unique's a very difficult word, right? But is our proposition demonstrably, measurably, and can we evidence that it's different? Um, and a lot of the time in the consultancy space, that comes down to what we spoke about before, like evidencing the impact. Because everyone can say is, look, we've got a great leadership program. We've got the thinking around, how we develop leaders, A, B, C, D, all of that. Everyone can put a great proposal together. But clients just want impact. They need, it's not about how beautiful you can build a proposition around the leadership coaching program or whatever it is. It's about being able to evidence impact. And I don't think we do enough of that. I know I don't. I mean, the challenge with me is a lot of my client interventions I can't talk about. So that makes it difficult. There's a lot of clients where I'll start working with the board and the CEO, and legally the NDA will say you will not disclose you're working for us. You won't even do a social media post saying, hey, back in New York with A, B, and C this week. Like nothing. It's almost like a complete media blackout. So that makes it difficult. But there are still other ways to evidence the impact of the work that you do. And I think consultancies have just got to do a much better job of that. And then, platforms, not it's not all about evaluate, but platforms like that give substance and give consultancies the ability to say, we back what we're going to advise you to do. We back it up with data, not our opinion about what you need is A, B, and C, or subjectively, or anything driven out of bias, or brief conversations between a few of the senior team. And that becomes, well, you need X, Y, and Z. It's like, all of that subjectivity is removed. And if you can get down to the data is telling us we need to help you do X, that's so much more palatable for clients. And it makes the conversation about fees and sign off demonstrably easier.
Yeah.
Because you're not asking a senior team or the economic buyer to make this leap of faith that broadly you get what our problem is, and I think you've articulated it okay, and I think you can get us to where we need to get to. You start off with what I call a position of truth, which is the data's telling us this.
So there is a place for subjectivity. This is what I've found in my positioning work is that need to be able to say what everybody else is thinking, perhaps in your sector, but is unwilling to say. There are always those
Yeah.
messages where people are skirting with controversy. You don't yourself hedge by the looks of it, Cris. You talk
No.
in inconvenient truths. So
Yep.
how much of standing out, honestly, is just having the nerve to say something a decent chunk of your market won't want to hear?
Um, well, definitely in my space, that's a must. In some spaces, that might not work as well, but in my space, you know, a CEO or a senior team will bring me in predominantly because I will say you're wrong. Um, I can have a conversation, the inconvenient truth, as you put it, is, I can have those inconvenient conversations that an internal exec member maybe can't have. Now, the interesting thing there is why not? Because that brings us back to psychological safety. But it makes it easier for me to say, look, in my experience and looking at the other organizations I've worked with in your sector, I think this is the wrong approach. Or certainly sometimes um, with a senior team and an exec team, the inconvenient truth is, they'll say, well, we need to coach all of our management team, and they're holding us back, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And I'll go in and go, the inconvenient truth is it's you guys that are holding things back, not the management team. Now, they won't observe that because their bias will be, oh, it's got to be the exec or the SLT or the management team. The management team are never going to have the courage to go, hang on a minute, it's you 12 that are the issue, not us. But you have to be, you can't do that on day one, right? That's a time served position.
Mm.
You can't be a brand new consultant into the sector who's never advised a client and go into a board and go, I think it's you 12 that are wrong. That's a hard sell. So that level of confidence and the ability to do that comes over time. But going back to where we started, it also comes with being an ex-CEO. There's a difference in the peer relationship from between a CEO and a CEO or ex-CEO than there is a CEO and a consultant. There just is, and it doesn't mean that that's right, but it's just the way the world works. But yeah, I have to be brutally honest, and sometimes that conversation has been with a CEO that's brought me in, and I've had to sit that CEO down and say, "You're the issue."
Yeah. Yeah.
Now
Difficult
that's a now
conversation.
that's a tough that's a
Oh
tough
God,
one,
yeah. Difficult
you know.
sell.
But from an authenticity point of view, you said earlier, we have a duty to advise clients that sometimes we might say we're probably not the right people to help you do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Now we might have done an assessment or whatever. Actually, I think you need this, not us. Um, I have a duty from a coaching perspective to say, this means I probably won't be putting my invoice in at the end of the month, but you're the actual issue. Right? I'll be prepared because that's the advice the client needs versus, let's tell him what he wants because I want to keep putting the invoices in.
No, the integrity and
And
authenticity comes first.
absolutely, yeah.
Unequivocal. Cris, before we wrap things up, I wanted
Yeah.
just check in on what's coming next for you. What are you working? Is it further developments in the Evaluate program? Is it something on the consultancy side? What's most prevalent for you?
So I've got a lot of speaking to do this year. So keynotes are getting booked up. And a lot of them can be months and months and months in advance. So some really cool stuff with a couple of big tech companies, like the global tech companies. That's really exciting. Evaluate Hub is, I mean, if anyone wants a demo, they can reach out and I give them a demo. It's the development is finished in terms of the platform and how it works and the methodology and all of the things behind the scenes. We've gone through tons of testing. The next phase now over the next month is to build that sort of front end SaaS capability where people like you can go on and create your account and then start to use it.
Yeah.
So that's the next phase. So we're probably a month away from that. And then we'll launch it as a commercially available piece of SaaS. And then I am doing a lot of work in a sector that I haven't done any work in before, but I've been asked to go in by a couple of CEOs into the social housing sector in the UK. So we have a huge social housing issue in the UK. The government, the language is we have a social housing crisis. Now I'm not saying I'm going to single-handedly solve the crisis, but I'm being asked to go into several of the big social housing providers and help them look at how they lead those organizations, how they shift culture, and how they drive innovation in that sector to help, combat the the issue we have around lack of available social housing, quality of stock, all of the
Yeah.
things. Um, that's quite interesting because it's less about private sector growth and increasing market cap and executive bonuses, and it's more about how do we do something more purpose driven and socially good, which I'm quite enjoying. So I'll be doing more of that this year.
Amazing, amazing,
Yeah,
important work. So Chris, we always wrap up my interviews with snog, marry, avoid.
yeah.
Not like that. Be asking you to out your secret crushes, but a snog, for example, is a quick win in business. What would you advocate as a quick win that you think some of the consultancy leaders out there could deploy almost immediately?
Yeah. Okay. So this is definite for leaders. And I'll give this into the context of the work that I do. My snog is failure.
Okay.
So um, what leaders need to do is to reframe the context of failure in organizations. So what I mean by that is, go and find someone in the organization that maybe took some risk and didn't pay off. Maybe you as a leader can tell a story in your organization where you say, look, guys, risk is important. We've got to try things. We've got to experiment. I did this years ago and it didn't work out, but here's what I learned.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is from a leadership point of view, people, they watch what you reward, not what you say. So you can talk about, I want risk and creativity and all that, but if you don't reward it and it's not visible, then they won't do it. And a great example of that is everyone knows WD-40, the company, right? Yeah. So Gary Ridge was the CEO, and he took WD-40 from $300 million to $3.5 billion, and he cites the shift because he replaced the word failure with learning moment. So the context of failure was eradicated in WD-40, and he basically said, I want you to go out and fail, and then I want you to look at those failures as learning moments and feed that learning back to the organization.
Well, you
So
you you just
yeah,
surprised me there because I was convinced you were going to tell the story of how they'd failed 39 times because the 40 in WD-40 is just that, isn't it? It's the 40th version of that product.
yeah, no,
Yeah, so
but
they are the
but
perfect
that
self.
came because of his reframing of language.
Incredible.
He made it safe to take risk and fail.
Yeah, great.
So yeah,
Okay,
I'd snog failure.
just don't go out snogging WD-40. Right. Marry, something you couldn't live without in the business for the long term.
So from a leadership point of view, in every sector, but given what we've talked about today, as a leader, authenticity.
Yeah.
So I said a minute ago, people reward, they reward, people watch what you reward and what you value, not what you say you do, not what the values on the company wall are, not
Mm.
what's in the corporate brochure. People follow leaders, not strategy decks or corporate brochures. So genuine authenticity. And one of the things that we've talked a few things about today actually is if you're authentic as a leader, you will create an environment of psychological safety. And if you do that, you get the Gary Ridge bit, you get the snog failure bit, you will get people going, it's okay to challenge, it's okay to um to challenge the status quo and to suggest new things. And so there's tons and tons of stats around this, but broadly, the most consistent stat is organizations with high levels of psychological safety are between 60 and 70% more innovative. Because you get that Gary Ridge bit, you get
Yeah.
the willingness for people to take risk.
Amazing. Okay. Avoid something to ditch in business that's not serving you.
Theatre.
Okay. Yeah, you did
And what
cue this earlier on. Yes. What do you
Yeah,
mean by that?
so being performative. So in the innovation world, we call that innovation theatre. So, you know, don't buy a ping pong table or a pool table with pink felt, yeah, and then say we've now got a creative culture. Do you know, right? Um, build a proper environment. If you want innovation and creativity, build an environment where the behaviors in that organization are all of the right ingredients um, to promote that kind of behavior. So um, don't do anything because you think it makes you look more creative or you think it makes you look different. Focus on genuine creativity and genuine differentiation. And the stat that I've got for you for this, because I think again, evidence and outcome, the stats don't lie. And it goes back to the one that you cited earlier. 84% of execs say innovation's critical for growth, but only 6% are actually satisfied with the performance. I don't know what the statistic is, but I guarantee you a hell of a lot more than 6% of those of those organizations will actually be looking like or telling the world that they're innovative. That's theatre.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Cris Beswick, thank you so much for being with us today on the Unique Boutique.
My pleasure.